The plane hummed quietly as passengers settled into their seats, the faint rustle of seat belts and overhead compartments blending with the low buzz of conversation. James and Carla, a black couple in their early 30s, sat side by side in the middle section of the plane. Their calm demeanor contrasted with the excited chatter of other travelers. Some scrolling through their phones, others already flipping through in-flight magazines. For James and Carla, this flight was supposed to be uneventful, a routine journey for a weekend getaway to unwind from their busy lives. But not everyone saw it that way. Linda Scott, a senior flight attendant, moved briskly up and down the aisle, her sharp eyes darting to and fro as she performed her duties. Linda prided herself on maintaining control, on running a tight ship, or, in this case, a smooth flight. She had been working for the airline for over a decade and knew the ins and outs of her job like the back of her hand. However, her confidence had a way of tipping into something less flattering. Assumptions about people, snap judgments she justified as gut instincts. As Linda approached James and Carla, she paused, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. To the casual observer, it might have looked like she was about to offer her standard cheery greeting or ask if they needed assistance. But there was a tightness in her smile, a sharpness in her gaze that only those paying close attention would notice. "Excuse me," Linda said, her tone polite, but edged with something colder. "Can I see your boarding passes?" James looked up, surprised. "Sure," he said, reaching into his pocket. Carla handed hers over as well, exchanging a puzzled glance with her husband. Linda scrutinized the tickets for a long moment, her lips pursing. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she said, "It seems there's been a mix-up. These seats are assigned to different passengers." Carla blinked. "That's not possible. We booked these seats weeks ago. There shouldn't be any mistake." "I'll need to double-check with the system," Linda replied curtly. "Just stay here for now." As Linda walked away, James sighed, shaking his head. "Here we go," he muttered under his breath. Carla gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, but couldn't hide the tension creeping into her own posture. Minutes passed, and the other passengers began to notice the unusual delay. The murmur of conversation grew louder, with some people craning their necks to see what was happening. Linda returned, this time with another crew member in tow. A younger attendant named Clara, whose wide eyes and hesitant steps suggested she wasn't entirely sure why she was being dragged into this. "I've confirmed with the system," Linda said, her voice louder now, ensuring nearby passengers could hear. "There's no record of these seats being booked under your names." "That doesn't make any sense," Carla said firmly. "We have the email confirmation and everything. Would you like to see it?" Linda's face hardened. "Mom, I need you to calm down. We can resolve this, but you'll need to cooperate." Carla's jaw tightened, but she stayed seated, pulling out her phone to find the confirmation email. Before she could even scroll to it, Linda raised a hand. "Actually, I think it's best if we have you step off the planes so we can sort this out with the gate agent." The air around them seemed to freeze. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, their curiosity now tinged with discomfort. James sat up straighter. "Why do we need to leave the plane?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. "We've done nothing wrong." "It's standard procedure," Linda said dismissively. "We'll need to verify everything before we can let you continue on this flight." Clara shifted uncomfortably beside Linda, her gaze flicking between the couple and her senior colleague. "Maybe we can handle this here," she suggested softly. "They have their boarding passes and—" "Clara," Linda interrupted, her tone sharp. "This isn't up for discussion." Carla looked at James, her eyes filled with a mix of frustration and disbelief. He nodded subtly, his expression calm but resolute. "We're not going anywhere," he said. "If there's an issue, you can check it right here." Linda's face flushed, and her jaw tightened as she stepped back. "If you won't cooperate," she said icily, "I'll have no choice but to call security." The tension in the cabin was palpable now. Passengers were no longer pretending to ignore the situation, their whispers growing louder. A man in the row behind James and Carla leaned over to his seatmate. "This doesn't feel right," he murmured. As Linda stormed off, James and Carla stayed seated, their calm composure masking the storm of emotions swirling inside. Clara lingered for a moment, her brow furrowed, before following Linda. When Linda returned, her face was flushed with determination, and she wasn't alone. Two uniformed officers trailed behind her, their presence sending a ripple of unease through the cabin. "This is escalating way too fast," a woman whispered from across the aisle. As the officers approached James and Carla, the couple exchanged a glance, their unspoken understanding evident in the way they braced themselves. But before a word could be spoken, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please remain seated as we address an issue with one of our crew members." The cabin fell silent, every eye turning toward the front of the plane. Linda's confident demeanor faltered, her steps slowing as she turned toward the cockpit. James leaned slightly toward Carla, his voice low. "Something's about to happen." Carla nodded, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. "Let's see how this plays out." The captain emerged moments later, his expression unreadable but commanding attention as he walked straight toward Linda. The officers paused, looking to him for direction. "Miss Scott," the captain said, his tone calm but firm, "a decision has been made. Effective immediately, you are to be removed from this flight." Gasps rippled through the cabin, and all eyes snapped to Linda, who stood frozen in place. Her face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing as though searching for words that wouldn't come. James and Carla remained seated, watching the scene unfold with quiet resolve. The tension in the air was electric, the power dynamics shifting in ways no one could have anticipated. And as Linda was escorted off the plane, her steps unsteady and her confidence shattered, the passengers were left with a story they wouldn't soon forget. A story that was only just beginning. As Linda stepped off the plane, escorted by the captain and the two officers, a hush lingered in the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock, curiosity, and in some cases approval. Some whispered among themselves, while others kept their eyes on James and Carla, silently wondering what had really unfolded. James leaned back in his seat, exhaling deeply as he finally allowed himself to relax, if only slightly. "Well, that's something you don't see every day," he murmured, his tone carrying a mix of dry humor and lingering disbelief. Carla gave him a sideways glance, her lips curving into a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's not over," she said softly. "You know it's not." And she was right. Despite the apparent resolution of the immediate conflict, the couple could feel the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions pressing down on them. Who had truly been at fault? What had motivated Linda's actions? And why did it take the captain stepping in for the situation to de-escalate? As the plane's crew tried to regain control of the atmosphere, Clara, the younger flight attendant, appeared beside James and Carla's row, her expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry about everything," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Carla tilted her head, studying Clara for a moment. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone calm but pointed. Clara hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. I don't think now is the right time," she said, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "But I just wanted to let you know that not everyone agreed with how Linda handled things." Clara stopped herself, biting her lip. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't say more." Before James or Carla could press further, Clara excused herself, disappearing toward the back of the plane. James frowned, his brows knitting together. "She knows something," he said. "Obviously," Carla replied. "But if she's scared to talk, it must be serious." The plane remained grounded for a while longer, the delay stretching beyond what anyone had expected. Passengers began to grow restless, murmuring about missed connections and delayed schedules. Yet, the earlier incident had left an imprint on everyone, keeping the mood subdued. Meanwhile, James and Carla tried to piece together the day's events. They replayed the encounter with Linda in their minds, questioning what might have triggered her behavior. Was it simply a mistake, or was there something deeper at play? Carla opened her phone again, scrolling through the email confirmation for their tickets, as if needing to reassure herself that they hadn't imagined the whole ordeal. It's all here, she said, showing James the details. The flight number, seat assignments, everything. There was no mix-up. I never thought there was, James said, his voice steady. But proving that doesn't explain why she singled us out in the first place. Carla sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. Do you think it was? She trailed off, hesitant to finish the thought. James didn't need her to. Maybe, he said quietly, but let's not jump to conclusions yet. Let's see what else comes to light. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the plane began to move. The captain came over the intercom, apologizing for the delay and promising to make up for lost time in the air. As the aircraft taxied down the runway, a tentative sense of normalcy returned, at least on the surface. But for James and Carla, the tension remained. They couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. As the flight progressed, they noticed subtle shifts in the crew's behavior. Clara seemed to go out of her way to check on them, her demeanor kind and attentive. Other attendants avoided their row altogether, their expressions carefully neutral. It was as though an invisible line had been drawn, dividing the team into those who sympathized with the couple and those who stood with Linda, even in her absence. Midway through the flight, Clara approached again, this time carrying 2 cups of water and a small tray of snacks. I thought you might like these, she said with a tentative smile, setting the tray down on their table. Thank you, Carla said, her tone warm but still cautious. Clara lingered for a moment, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her uniform. Look, I don't want to overstep, she said, her voice low. But I want you to know that what happened back there wasn't your fault. Linda has a history of these kinds of incidents. James raised an eyebrow. What kind of history? Clara hesitated again, glancing around nervously. It's not my place to say, she admitted. But there have been complaints, formal ones even. Some passengers, some co-workers. Most of them get brushed under the rug. She's been with the company for so long, and she knows how to navigate the system. But today, Clara trailed off, shaking her head. Today, she crossed the line. And I think the captain finally had enough. Carla's eyes narrowed. So this wasn't just about us, she said slowly. It's part of a pattern. Clara nodded, her expression grim. I think so. But if I were you, I'd be careful about who you talk to about this. Some people are very protective of Linda, no matter what she does. With that, Clara straightened and moved back down the aisle, leaving James and Carla with even more questions than before. The rest of the flight passed uneventfully, but the weight of the earlier incident lingered. James and Carla couldn't stop thinking about Clara's words, about the implications of what she had hinted at but hadn't fully explained. They resolved to dig deeper once they landed to uncover the truth behind what had happened. As the plane began its descent, Carla turned to James, her expression resolute. We're not letting this go, she said. James nodded. Not a chance. The wheels touched down with a jolt, and the plane taxied to the gate. Passengers gathered their belongings, the usual chaos of disembarkation masking the undercurrent of tension that still hung in the air. James and Carla waited until most of the cabin had cleared before standing, not wanting to draw any more attention to themselves. As they stepped off the plane and into the bustling airport terminal, they couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Somewhere in the distance, Linda was likely being debriefed or questioned about her actions. Somewhere else, the captain and the crew were preparing their reports. And James and Carla knew that their part in this story was just beginning. What had started as a simple flight had turned into something far more complex. A web of power dynamics, biases, and hidden agendas that they were now determined to unravel. As James and Carla walked through the terminal, the hum of airport activity surrounded them. Travelers hurried to their next gate, announcements echoed over the intercom, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee from nearby kiosks mingled with the faint scent of jet fuel. It was all so ordinary, yet for James and Carla, everything felt different now. The events on the plane had shifted their perspective, leaving them hyper-aware of every glance and whisper. Carla clutched her carry-on tightly, her mind racing. What do we even do now? She asked, her voice low enough to ensure no one around could hear. James shrugged, his gaze scanning the terminal, as if looking for an answer in the sea of faces. "I think we wait," he said. "See if they contact us. Ask for a statement, anything. But honestly, I don't trust them to do the right thing without some pressure." Carla nodded, her expression hardening. "Agreed. This isn't the kind of thing you let slide. If Linda has a history of this behavior, like Clara said, then the airline has been enabling it. They owe us an explanation." They found a quiet corner near the baggage claim and sat down, trying to process everything. Carla pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen as she searched for any news about the incident. James leaned back, his arms crossed, and watched as people reunited with loved ones or hurried off to their next destination. After several minutes, Carla frowned and held her phone up for James to see. "Look at this," she said, showing him a tweet from another passenger on their flight. The post read, "Asterisk drama on our flight today. Flight attendant gets removed after altercation with a black couple. Finally, justice served. Hashtag airline drama asterisk." James sighed. "Looks like word's already getting out," he said. Carla scrolled down, finding more posts from other passengers. Some expressed support for the couple, while others speculated about what might have happened. A few even defended Linda, claiming she had always been professional on past flights. The mix of opinions only deepened the mystery, making it clear that the story was far from black and white in the eyes of the public. Just as Carla was about to close the app, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen and froze. "It's from Clara," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. James leaned in, curious. "What does it say?" Carla opened the message, which had come through a social media platform. Clara had written, "Asterisk, I'm sorry for how things went down today. I know it wasn't fair to you. If you want to talk more, I'm willing to share what I know. Just don't mention my name, please. Asterisk." James raised an eyebrow. "She's taking a risk by reaching out," he said. Carla nodded, quickly typing a response. She thanked Clara for her courage and asked when and where they could talk. Within minutes, Clara replied with a location near the airport, a small cafe tucked away from the main terminal. She promised to meet them there in an hour. As they waited, James and Carla tried to piece together what they might learn. Was this about personal biases, professional rivalries, or something more systemic within the airline? The possibilities felt endless, each one more unsettling than the last. The cafe was quiet and dimly lit when they arrived, the faint sound of soft jazz playing in the background. Clara was already there, seated at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up nervously as James and Carla approached, gesturing for them to sit. "Thanks for coming," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around, as if worried someone might recognize her. "I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but I couldn't just stay silent." Carla leaned forward, her expression kind but serious. "We appreciate it," she said, "but we need to understand what's going on. Why did Linda act the way she did? And why does it feel like some of the crew were on her side?" Clara sighed, wrapping her hands around her cup. "It's complicated," she admitted. "Linda's been with the airline for years, and she has a lot of connections. She's good at making people see her as the victim, even when she's the one in the wrong. And honestly, some of the higher-ups just don't want to deal with the hassle of disciplining her. They think it's easier to look the other way." James frowned. "That's not just wrong. It's dangerous," he said. "She could have put passengers at risk." Clara nodded. "I know. And it's not just passengers. She's made life miserable for some of the crew too. But most people are too scared to speak up. They're afraid of losing their jobs." Carla's jaw tightened. "Well, we're not afraid," she said firmly. "And we're not letting this go. If the airline won't take responsibility, we'll make sure they're held accountable." Clara hesitated, then leaned in closer. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice barely audible. "Linda didn't act alone today. Someone tipped her off before we even boarded. They told her to watch out for you two, specifically." James and Carla exchanged shocked glances. "Who?" James asked. Clara shook her head. I don't know, she admitted, but it wasn't random. Someone had an agenda, and Linda was just the one who acted on it. The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's behavior. It was part of something bigger, something more deliberate. And James and Carla knew they were now at the center of it. As Clara stood to leave, she gave them a final, pleading look. Be careful, she said. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. But if anyone can make a difference, I think it's you. With that, she disappeared into the night, leaving James and Carla to grapple with the weight of what they had just learned. The conflict was no longer confined to the plane or even the airline. It was a battle against deeper forces, and they were determined to uncover the truth. As James and Carla left the cafe, their minds churned with Clara's cryptic warning. The idea that someone had targeted them specifically was chilling. Who would do such a thing? And why? The questions weighed heavily on them, but they knew they couldn't stop now. The next morning, after a restless night at a nearby hotel, Carla began researching in earnest. She scoured the internet for any mentions of similar incidents involving Linda or the airline. What she found only deepened the mystery. A handful of posts on niche forums described situations where passengers, particularly black passengers, had been singled out by flight attendants. Though no names were mentioned, the patterns were hard to ignore. James, look at this, Carla said, turning her laptop to show him. It's not just us. This has happened before. And it looks like the airline always finds a way to sweep it under the rug. James leaned in, his face darkening as he read. So they've been covering for her. Or maybe for more than just her, he said. This isn't just about Linda. It's a systemic issue. Their determination to get answers only grew stronger. They decided to reach out to a journalist known for covering social justice issues, hoping to bring attention to the broader problem. Carla sent an email explaining their experience and included links to the posts she found. By the time they finished, it felt like a small but significant step forward. As they waited for a response, James and Carla debated their next move. Should they contact the airline directly? Or would that give them a chance to control the narrative before the truth came out? They were still discussing it when James's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It's a private number, he said, frowning. Should I answer? Carla hesitated, then nodded. Could it be important? James picked up, his voice cautious. Hello. The voice on the other end was low and steady, almost too calm. Mr. James, I suggest you drop this matter before it gets out of hand. Some things are better left alone. James froze, his grip tightening on the phone. Who is this? He demanded. The caller ignored his question. You and your wife should focus on your own lives. Let the airline handle their business. There was a brief pause, then the line went dead. Carla stared at James, alarmed. What was that about? She asked. James shook his head, his jaw clenched. Someone's trying to scare us off, he said, but it's not going to work. The call only fueled their determination. They decided to file a formal complaint with the airline, detailing everything that had happened and demanding accountability. When they submitted the complaint online, they immediately received a generic response acknowledging receipt, but nothing more. A few days later, they received an email from the airline's legal department. It was carefully worded, emphasizing the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion, while also downplaying the incident. They claimed to be conducting an internal investigation and asked James and Carla to refrain from speaking to the media until it was complete. Carla's frustration boiled over as she read the email aloud. They're just trying to buy time, she said. They want us to go quiet so they can bury this. James nodded. We're not letting that happen, he said. That evening, they got a response from the journalist they'd contacted. She was intrigued by their story and wanted to meet in person to discuss it further. The meeting was set for the following day at a public park, a neutral location that felt safe. When they arrived, the journalist, a woman named Vanessa, greeted them warmly but got straight to business. I've been covering cases like this for years, she said. But what makes your story unique is the level of coordination involved. If what you're saying is true, it could expose some serious issues within the airline. James and Carla shared everything they knew, including Clara's warning and the threatening phone call. Vanessa listened intently, taking notes and asking probing questions. By the end of their meeting, she was convinced there was more to the story than met the eye. "I'll start digging into this," Vanessa said. "But be prepared. If we go public, the backlash could get intense. Are you ready for that?" James and Carla exchanged a glance. They were scared, yes, but the thought of staying silent was even scarier. "We're ready," James said firmly. As they left the park, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. James noticed a car parked across the street with tinted windows that seemed to follow them as they walked back to their hotel. "Do you see that?" he asked Carla, his voice low. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart racing. "Yeah," she said. "Do you think they're watching us?" James nodded. "It's possible. Let's stay calm and head straight inside." Once in their room, they drew the curtains and tried to focus on their next steps. But the tension was palpable, a sense of being under surveillance adding another layer of fear to an already overwhelming situation. That night, as they lay awake in the darkness, Carla whispered, "Do you think we're in over our heads?" James took her hand, his grip steady despite the uncertainty. "Maybe," he admitted, "but we can't back down now. Not when we're this close to the truth." As the hours ticked by, they knew the stakes were higher than ever. The forces working against them were powerful and well connected, but so were their allies. All they could do now was hold their ground and prepare for whatever came next. The following morning, James and Carla woke to a flurry of notifications on their phones. Vanessa's investigation had moved faster than they anticipated. She'd sent them an encrypted email with startling new information. Not only had Linda been involved in several other questionable incidents, but she was also connected to a senior figure in the airline's management. The email hinted at a possible cover-up stretching far beyond what James and Carla had imagined. Carla sat on the edge of the bed, reading aloud. "This isn't just about Linda," she said, her voice shaking. "It's about the entire system protecting her and others like her. They've silenced people before, James. This could be dangerous." James took a deep breath, the weight of her words sinking in. "We knew this was bigger than one person," he said. But hearing it confirmed, it's a lot. Before they could process the information further, a knock at their hotel room door startled them. They froze, exchanging a glance. "Were we expecting anyone?" Carla whispered. James shook his head and moved cautiously toward the door. Peering through the peephole, he saw a uniformed courier holding an envelope. He opened the door slightly, enough to take the envelope without inviting the man inside. "This was marked urgent," the courier said, nodding before leaving. James closed the door and opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message. "****, stop digging, or you'll regret it. ****. Carla's face went pale as she read over his shoulder. "This isn't a warning. It's a threat," she said. James clenched his fists, anger overtaking his fear. "They're trying to scare us, but all this does is prove we're onto something." Carla nodded, though her unease was evident. "We need to tell Vanessa about this. She has to know they're escalating." Vanessa agreed to meet them again, this time at a busy location for safety. When they showed her the note, she frowned, her determination hardening. "This confirms we're rattling the right cages," she said, "but it also means we need to be careful. I'll dig deeper, but you two should consider laying low for a while. They won't stop at threats if they think you're a real threat to them." James and Carla agreed to stay cautious, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they were already being watched. Later that night, James noticed something strange while reviewing their bank statements. A significant withdrawal had been made without their authorization. "This can't be right," he said, showing Carla. "I didn't make this withdrawal, and I know you didn't either." Carla stared at the screen, alarmed. "They're trying to hit us where it hurts, our finances. They must have hacked our account." They contacted their bank immediately, but the process of recovering their funds was slow. It was another tactic to unsettle them, to make them feel vulnerable. The next day brought another twist. Vanessa called them with a startling update. "You're not going to believe this," she said. I found a whistleblower, someone who used to work with Linda and saw firsthand how she operated. They're willing to talk, but only under strict anonymity. James and Carla were both relieved and anxious. A whistleblower could provide the missing piece of the puzzle, but it also meant their story was inching closer to exposing powerful figures. Vanessa arranged for the whistleblower's testimony to be recorded, and when they heard the voice on the other end of the call, their blood ran cold. The person detailed how Linda had systematically targeted certain passengers and used her connections within the airline to avoid consequences. It's not just her, the whistleblower said. There's a whole network of people covering for her. They think they're untouchable, and for a long time, they've been right. As the call ended, the whistleblower added one final chilling detail. Watch your backs. They don't like loose ends. James and Carla sat in stunned silence, the gravity of their situation sinking in. They were no longer just fighting for justice. They were fighting against a powerful machine intent on protecting itself at all costs. That night, their hotel room phone rang. It was the front desk, informing them that a package had arrived. Suspicious, James went to retrieve it, finding a small, unmarked box. Back in the room, he opened it cautiously. Inside was a USB drive and a note. Asterisk, asterisk, the truth will set you free or destroy you. Asterisk, asterisk. James and Carla exchanged a wary glance. What was on the drive? Could it be the breakthrough they needed? Or another trap? As they plugged it into their laptop, the screen flickered to life, and a folder appeared labeled simply asterisk, asterisk, evidence. Asterisk, asterisk. Their hands trembled as they opened it, revealing a treasure trove of internal documents, emails, and video footage implicating not just Linda, but several high-ranking officials within the airline. The evidence was damning, painting a picture of systemic bias and a coordinated effort to suppress complaints. But as they delved deeper, a sense of dread settled over them. Whoever had sent this wanted them to have it. But why? And at what cost? The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. Yet James and Carla knew there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and it was up to them to make sure it was heard. James and Carla stared at the evidence on their screen, their emotions a whirlwind of anger, relief, and fear. This was the smoking gun they had been searching for, but it also felt like the weight of the world had just landed on their shoulders. With this kind of proof, there was no question about the depth of the corruption they were up against. Carla took a deep breath and said, "This isn't just about us anymore. This is about everyone who's ever been silenced or ignored. We can't let this stay hidden." James nodded, though his mind was racing with the risks. "If we're going to do this, we have to be smart. Once this gets out, we'll have a target on our backs." They decided to loot Vanessa in immediately. When they shared the contents of the USB drive during a late-night call, Vanessa's usually steady voice cracked with emotion. "This is monumental," she said, "but it's also dangerous. We need to make sure this gets to the right people. Media outlets that won't back down, legal advocates who can handle the fallout." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Vanessa coordinated with her network of journalists and legal experts, ensuring that the evidence would be disseminated widely and safely. James and Carla stayed in constant contact with her, moving cautiously and looking over their shoulders at every turn. But just as they felt they were gaining the upper hand, their phones started buzzing with unknown numbers. Emails flooded their inboxes with cryptic messages. One stood out, a direct threat that mentioned their family. Carla's heart sank as she read it aloud. "They know where my mom lives, James. They're not bluffing anymore." James clenched his jaw, anger overtaking his fear. "They think they can scare us into silence. But this isn't just about us anymore. We have to see this through." The tipping point came when one of Vanessa's contacts, a high-profile journalist, decided to go public with the story. The journalist, well known for exposing corruption, scheduled a live broadcast to reveal the evidence. James, Carla, and Vanessa were invited to participate anonymously to protect their identities. The broadcast was electrifying. The journalist methodically laid out the evidence showing the systemic bias and corruption within the airline. Clips of Linda's actions, internal emails, and whistleblower testimony painted an undeniable picture. Public reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media lit up with outrage, and calls for accountability flooded the airline's headquarters. Just when it seemed the tide was turning in their favor, an unexpected twist emerged. The journalist revealed during the broadcast that the anonymous source of the USB drive was none other than a disgruntled executive within the airline. This executive, frustrated with the culture of silence and corruption, had decided to take matters into their own hands. As the broadcast ended, James and Carla received a call from Vanessa. Her voice was shaky but resolute. "You too did it. This story is everywhere. They can't hide anymore." But before they could celebrate, there was a knock at their hotel room door. James approached cautiously, his heart pounding. When he opened the door, a group of plainclothes officers stood there, their badges flashing. "We need to talk," one of them said firmly. James and Carla exchanged a tense glance before stepping aside to let them in. To their surprise, the officers weren't there to arrest them, but to offer protection. "We've been monitoring this case," one officer explained, "and we believe you're in danger. The people you've exposed have significant resources, and they won't take this lying down." Relief mixed with fear as James and Carla realized the fight wasn't over. The public might have rallied behind their story, but the forces they challenged weren't going to fade quietly. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles, public apologies from the airline, and increased scrutiny of industry practices. Linda was removed from her position and faced multiple lawsuits. The airline's leadership scrambled to control the damage, but the public outcry was relentless. In a final unexpected twist, the disgruntled executive who had leaked the evidence came forward, revealing their identity in an exclusive interview. Their decision to speak out inspired others within the airline industry to share their own stories of systemic issues, sparking a larger movement for accountability and change. For James and Carla, the journey had been harrowing, but they found solace in knowing they had made a difference. Sitting together in their small apartment, far from the chaos of media attention, Carla turned to James with a tired smile. "We did what we set out to do," she said. "We proved that no one is above accountability." James nodded, his gaze steady. "And we show people that it's worth fighting back, no matter how powerful the opposition." As they leaned back, letting the weight of their ordeal finally lift, they knew their lives would never be the same. But they also knew they had stood up for what was right. And that was a victory no one could take from them.